The wedding cake toppled to the floor with a sickening crash, frosting splattering across the church tiles like broken dreams. The bride's wheelchair had bumped the table during their first dance attempt, and now silence filled the reception hall as guests stared in horror. 8-year-old Emma tugged at her father's tuxedo sleeve and whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, "Daddy, does this mean Sarah isn't going to be my real mommy now?" The question hung in the air like a prayer waiting for an answer, while tears rolled down the bride's face as she sat motionless in her chair, believing she had ruined the most important day of their lives. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 months earlier, David Chun had been stacking boxes in the warehouse at 4 in the morning, his third shift of the week, when his phone buzzed with a text from his daughter's school. Emma had fallen asleep during math class again, and the teacher was concerned about her exhaustion. David's heart sank as he read the message, knowing his 8-year-old was suffering from the same bone-deep weariness that had become his constant companion since his wife Maria's death 2 years ago. The cancer had taken Maria slowly, draining their savings account as surely as it drained the color from her cheeks. Even with insurance, the experimental treatments had cost everything they had and more. David had sold their house, moved into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment above Mrs. Patterson's bakery, and taken on every available shift at 3 different jobs just to keep Emma fed and clothed. The smell of fresh bread that wafted up through their floorboards each morning was a constant reminder of the stability they had lost, a life that now felt as distant as the moon. Emma had been 6 when Maria died, old enough to understand that mommy wasn't coming back, but too young to process the magnitude of their loss. She had Maria's dark eyes and quick smile, but lately, that smile appeared less frequently. David watched his daughter retreat into herself, becoming quieter at dinner, spending more time drawing pictures of their old house, their old life, their complete family. Her latest artwork showed 3 stick figures holding hands under a rainbow, but the middle figure always had long hair and angel wings. David's days blurred together in an exhausting cycle of survival. He worked the overnight security shift at a downtown office building, catching 3 hours of sleep before his warehouse job began at 7. After that, he would race home to get Emma ready for school, drop her off, then head to his 3rd job, cleaning offices until it was time to pick her up again. Weekends meant grocery shopping with calculator in hand, carefully counting every dollar, and trying to give Emma some semblance of a normal childhood with trips to the free playground and library story time. The other parents at Emma's school knew their situation, and while most were kind, David felt the weight of their pity like a physical burden. He saw it in their careful smiles when he arrived for school events, still wearing his work uniform, in the way they spoke to him with that particular tone reserved for charity cases. Emma's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had gently suggested that Emma might benefit from counseling to help process her grief, but David couldn't afford the copays. Instead, he did his best to be both mother and father, braiding Emma's hair with YouTube tutorials and learning to cook the simple meals Maria had made look effortless. The financial pressure was relentless. Every month brought a juggling act of which bills to pay and which to let slide. The electric company had sent a final notice, and David had already negotiated 2 extensions on their rent with Mrs. Patterson, who had known Maria and taken pity on them. He sold everything of value they owned except Maria's wedding ring, which he kept in a small box by his bedside, unable to part with the last tangible piece of their life together. Some nights, after Emma was asleep, he would hold the ring and remember what it felt like to have a partner, someone to share the weight of responsibility and the small joys of raising a child. Emma's health had begun to worry him. She was losing weight, and the dark circles under her eyes made her look far older than her 8 years. When she caught a cold that lingered for weeks, David spent money they didn't have on doctor visits and medication. The pediatrician had been gentle but direct about Emma's needs, explaining that the stress and instability were taking a toll on her developing immune system. She needed better nutrition, more consistent sleep, and most importantly, less anxiety. About their precarious situation. David had tried to shield Emma from their financial struggles, but children sense more than adults realize. She had stopped asking for things she wanted, learned to say she wasn't hungry when there wasn't enough food, and began hoarding small treasures like broken crayons and worn hair ties as if preparing for another loss. Her drawings had evolved, too, showing their apartment with bars on the windows and storm clouds overhead, visual representations of the insecurity that had become their reality. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday evening when Emma developed a fever that spiked to 104 degrees. David raced her to the emergency room, his hands shaking as he carried her limp body through the automatic doors. The hospital staff was efficient and kind, but when the billing department appeared with forms and questions about insurance coverage, David felt the familiar knot of panic in his stomach. Emma needed tests, possibly an overnight stay, and he knew their insurance had a high deductible they couldn't meet. As Emma slept fitfully in the hospital bed, and 4 drip in her small arm, David sat in the uncomfortable chair beside her and calculated their remaining options. He had already borrowed money from every friend and family member willing to help. His parents had passed away years ago, and Maria's family lived across the country with their own financial struggles. The credit cards were maxed out, and he had nothing left to sell except Maria's ring, a thought that made his chest tighten with grief and guilt. It was during that long night in the hospital that David first encountered Sarah Martinez. Emma had woken around midnight, confused and frightened by the strange surroundings and medical equipment. David was trying to comfort her when he heard singing from the room next door, a soft lullaby in Spanish that seemed to calm not just the child in that room, but Emma as well. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. His daughter's breathing became more regular as the gentle melody continued, and for the first time in hours her fever seemed to break. The next morning, David learned that the voice belonged to a volunteer who visited the pediatric ward regularly. Sarah Martinez came every Tuesday and Thursday evening, bringing books, games, and most importantly, her presence to children who were facing medical challenges alone. The nurses spoke of her with genuine affection, describing how she had been volunteering for 3 years, ever since her own recovery from a spinal cord injury that had left her paralyzed from the waist down. David's first glimpse of Sarah came as she was leaving Emma's room after a brief visit. She moved her wheelchair with practiced grace, her long black hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her brown eyes held a warmth that seemed to light up the sterile hospital corridor. She had brought Emma a small stuffed elephant and a coloring book, gifts that made his daughter smile genuinely for the first time in weeks. When Sarah noticed David watching from the doorway, she introduced herself with a handshake that was firm and confident. Sarah was 29 years old, though her maturity and composure suggested someone who had lived through experiences that aged her beyond her years. She had been a dance instructor before her accident, teaching ballet and contemporary dance at a prestigious studio downtown. The car accident that changed her life had happened on a snowy evening 3 years ago when a drunk driver ran a red light, crushing her lower spine and ending her dancing career in an instant. The months of recovery had been brutal, not just physically but emotionally, as she struggled to redefine her identity and purpose. But Sarah had refused to let her disability define her limitations. She had channeled her natural grace and teaching ability into her volunteer work, finding ways to bring joy and comfort to children facing their own health challenges. Her apartment was adapted for wheelchair accessibility, and she had learned to drive with hand controls, maintaining her independence despite the dramatic changes to her mobility. She worked part-time as a freelance graphic designer, a skill she had developed during her recovery, and lived modestly but contentedly in a ground-floor unit near the hospital. What struck David most about Sarah was her complete lack of self-pity. While he had spent 2 years drowning in grief and financial stress, she had taken a devastating personal tragedy and transformed it into a source of strength for others. Her laugh was infectious, and she had an uncanny ability to connect with children who were frightened or in pain. Emma had responded to her immediately, chattering about her drawings and asking curious questions about Sarah's wheelchair with the innocent directness that only children possess. During Emma's 3-day hospital stay, Sarah visited twice more, and David found himself looking forward to her appearances with an anticipation that surprised him. She brought a stability and calm to their chaotic situation that he hadn't realized he desperately needed. When Emma was finally cleared to go home, Sarah offered to give them a ride, explaining that her van was equipped for both wheelchair access and had plenty of room for a tired father and daughter. The drive home was the first time David had felt relaxed in months. Sarah navigated the city traffic with confidence, while Emma chattered from the back seat about the elephant Sarah had given her, which she had named Angel after her mother. Sarah listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions and sharing stories about other brave children she had met at the hospital. David found himself studying her profile as she drove, noting the strength in her shoulders developed from years of wheelchair use and the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled at something Emma said. When they reached the apartment above Mrs. Patterson's bakery, Sarah helped carry Emma upstairs despite David's protests about the narrow staircase. She maneuvered her wheelchair with impressive skill, using the handrails to pull herself up while David carried the chair, then transferring back once they reached their landing. Emma insisted on giving Sarah a tour of their small home, proudly showing off her bedroom with its collection of stuffed animals and a gallery of drawings taped to her walls. Sarah studied Emma's artwork with the serious attention of a museum curator, commenting on the use of color and asking about the stories behind each picture. When she came to the drawings of their old house and complete family, she didn't offer empty platitudes or awkward sympathy. Instead, she simply said that Emma was very talented and that her mommy would be proud of such beautiful art. It was exactly the right thing to say, acknowledging Maria's memory without making Emma or David uncomfortable. Before leaving, Sarah wrote her phone number on a piece of paper and handed it to David. She explained that she knew how overwhelming it could be to navigate medical follow-ups and insurance issues alone, and offered to help with anything they might need. Her gesture was practical rather than pitying, offering assistance between equals rather than charity from someone privileged to someone less fortunate. David tucked the number into his wallet, uncertain if he would ever have the courage to use it, but grateful for the lifeline nonetheless. Over the following weeks, David found himself thinking about Sarah more than he had expected. Her calm presence had brought a peace to their crisis that he couldn't easily forget, and Emma mentioned her frequently, asking when they might see her again. David was reluctant to reach out, partly from pride and partly from a deeper fear of developing feelings for someone when his life was still so unstable. He had loved Maria completely, and the thought of caring for someone else felt like both a betrayal and a risk he couldn't afford. But Emma's health remained fragile, and when she developed another respiratory infection 2 weeks later, David found himself dialing Sarah's number at 2 in the morning. She answered immediately, her voice alert despite the late hour, and listened without judgment as he explained his fears about taking Emma back to the emergency room. Sarah offered to meet them at the hospital, and true to her word, she was waiting in the lobby when they arrived, providing a familiar face in the midst of medical uncertainty. This time, Sarah's presence was even more valuable. She knew the hospital staff, understood the insurance processes, and helped navigate the complex web of forms and procedures that had overwhelmed David during their previous visit. More importantly, She kept Emma calm and distracted during the long wait for test results, playing quiet games and telling stories that made his daughter giggle despite feeling sick. David watched in amazement as Sarah transformed their crisis into something manageable. Her wheelchair, no obstacle to her effectiveness as an advocate and companion. Emma's infection required a 5-day course of antibiotics and careful monitoring, but she would recover fully. As they prepared to leave the hospital, Sarah suggested they stop for breakfast at a family restaurant near David's apartment. It was early morning, and David realized he hadn't eaten in over 12 hours, too anxious about Emma to think about. Food, the simple act of sitting in a booth, sharing pancakes and orange juice while Emma colored on her placemat, felt like a luxury he had almost forgotten. During breakfast, Sarah shared more about her own journey after her accident. She spoke matter-of-factly about the challenges of adapting to life in a wheelchair, the process of grieving her former identity as a dancer, and the slow work of building a new sense of purpose and joy. Her honesty was refreshing after 2 years of well-meaning people telling David that everything would work out fine or that he was stronger than he knew. Sarah understood that some losses couldn't be fixed, only accepted and integrated into a new version of life. David found himself opening up about Maria's death and the overwhelming responsibility of single parenthood in ways he hadn't with anyone else. Sarah listened without trying to offer solutions or minimize his struggles, simply witnessing his experience with the same compassionate attention she gave to the children at the hospital. When Emma fell asleep against his shoulder, exhausted from her ordeal, Sarah suggested they sit quietly for a while longer, allowing David a rare moment of rest while she kept watch. It was during that peaceful interlude that David began to see Sarah not just as a helpful volunteer or kind stranger, but as a woman whose strength and resilience complemented his own determination to provide for his daughter. Her disability, rather than making her seem fragile, had clearly forged her into someone capable of facing challenges with grace and creativity. She had built a meaningful life from circumstances that might have defeated someone else, and her example gave him hope that he too might find stability and happiness again. As they prepared to leave the restaurant, Emma woke and immediately asked Sarah if she would come have dinner with them sometime. David felt his face flush with embarrassment at his daughter's directness, but Sarah smiled and said she would love to, if David thought that would be okay. The invitation hung between them, loaded with possibility and risk, while Emma waited expectantly for her father's response. David surprised himself by saying yes, though he immediately began worrying about what they could possibly serve for dinner that wouldn't reveal the extent of their poverty. Sarah seemed to sense his anxiety and quickly suggested she could bring groceries and cook for them, explaining that she had been experimenting with new recipes and would welcome the chance to cook for more than one person. Her offer was gracefully presented as mutual benefit rather than charity, allowing David to accept without damaging his pride. 3 days later, Sarah arrived at their apartment with bags of groceries and a carefully planned menu that took into account both Emma's limited palate and David's budget constraints. She had chosen simple, nutritious ingredients that could be stretched into multiple meals, effectively stocking their pantry while appearing to simply prepare one dinner. Her thoughtfulness was evident in every detail, from the kid-friendly foods that would appeal to Emma to the leftovers that would provide David with lunches for the rest of the week. Cooking together in their tiny kitchen revealed Sarah's adaptability and positive attitude. She had modified techniques to work from her wheelchair, using lower counters and specialized tools that allowed her to be completely self-sufficient. Emma was fascinated by these adaptations, asking curious questions about how Sarah reached high shelves and managed different cooking tasks. Sarah answered each question with patience and humor, turning Emma's curiosity into a natural learning experience about disability and capability. The dinner itself was the most normal David had felt since Maria's death. Emma chattered happily about school while Sarah asked engaging questions about her favorite subjects and friends. David found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in months, enjoying adult conversation while watching his daughter bloom under Sarah's attention. When Emma asked Sarah to help her with an art project after dinner, Sarah agreed enthusiastically, spreading supplies across their small kitchen table and working alongside Emma with genuine concentration. David watched them work together, Sarah's dark head bent close to Emma's lighter brown hair as they collaborated on a drawing of a garden full of flowers. Emma had been drawing mostly sad or anxious subjects for months, but with Sarah's encouragement, she was creating something hopeful and colorful. Sarah praised Emma's creativity while offering gentle suggestions, treating her young artistic partner with the respect of one artist to another. As the evening wound down, David walked Sarah to her van, Emma having already fallen asleep on the couch, exhausted from the excitement of having a dinner guest. The autumn air was crisp, and David found himself reluctant to end the evening, though he couldn't identify exactly why. Sarah transferred from her wheelchair to the driver's seat with practiced efficiency, but before starting the engine, she turned to David with an expression he couldn't quite read. Sarah thanked him for the evening, but her words carried a deeper meaning that suggested she too had found something special in their simple dinner together. She mentioned that she didn't often have the opportunity to be part of a family setting, and that Emma's enthusiasm and David's kindness had made her feel welcome in a way she hadn't experienced since her accident. Her admission revealed a loneliness that she typically kept hidden beneath her positive exterior, giving David a glimpse of the personal cost of her independence and strength. Before driving away, Sarah asked if she could take Emma to the children's museum the following Saturday, explaining that she had passes from her volunteer work and thought Emma would enjoy the interactive exhibits. David hesitated, not from any concern about Sarah's capability, but from the growing realization that his daughter was becoming attached to someone who might not be a permanent part of their lives. Yet Emma's happiness had been so rare lately that he found himself agreeing, despite his reservations about the implications. That night, as David lay on the pull-out couch listening to Emma's peaceful breathing from the next room, he reflected on how dramatically their lives had changed in just a few hours of Sarah's presence. The apartment felt warmer somehow, and Emma had gone to sleep with a smile instead of the worried frown that had become her default expression. David recognized that he was developing feelings for Sarah that went beyond gratitude for her help, emotions that both excited and terrified him in equal measure. The museum trip the following Saturday was a revelation for both Emma and David, who had insisted on coming along despite Sarah's assurance that she was comfortable managing Emma alone. David watched in amazement as Sarah navigated the crowded museum with Emma in tow, her wheelchair becoming not an obstacle but a unique vantage point for experiencing the exhibits. Emma rode on Sarah's lap during demonstrations, helped push the wheelchair through less crowded areas, and generally treated Sarah's disability as simply another characteristic rather than a limitation. Sarah's interaction with other museum visitors was equally impressive. She handled curious stares from children with grace, answering questions about her wheelchair when appropriate and redirecting attention to the exhibits when necessary. Her confidence and ease in public settings had clearly been hard-won, and David felt a growing admiration for the strength it must have taken to rebuild her social skills after such a life-changing injury. During lunch in the museum cafeteria, Emma announced that she wished Sarah could come to her school's upcoming family day, explaining that all the other children would have both parents there while she would only have her daddy. The innocent request revealed the depth of Emma's longing for a complete family unit, and David felt his heart break at the realization that his love alone couldn't fill the void left by Maria's death. Sarah responded with characteristic thoughtfulness, asking Emma to describe the event and expressing genuine interest in attending if David thought it would be appropriate. The family day invitation represented a significant step in their evolving relationship, one that would require David to publicly acknowledge Sarah as part of their family unit. He worried about the assumptions other parents might make, the questions Emma might face, and the implications for their fragile emotional stability if Sarah eventually decided to withdraw from their lives. Yet Emma's excitement at the possibility was so genuine that David found himself agreeing, despite his concerns about the potential consequences. The weeks leading up to Family Day were filled with small moments that gradually wove Sarah more deeply into their daily routine. She began calling in the evenings to check on Emma's homework, offering help with projects and providing encouragement when Emma struggled with difficult concepts. Her patience and creativity as a teacher became evident as she found innovative ways to explain math problems and help Emma with reading comprehension, skills that David had always struggled to provide effectively. Sarah's financial contribution to their household was subtle but significant. She frequently brought groceries under the guise of wanting to cook dinner, stocked their medicine cabinet with supplies Emma might need, and found ways to pay for small expenses like school supplies and clothing without making David feel like a charity case. Her approach was so tactful that David could accept her help without feeling diminished, a delicate balance that revealed her understanding of both pride and necessity. More importantly, Sarah brought emotional stability to their chaotic lives. Emma's anxiety decreased noticeably when Sarah was around, and her nightmares about losing her father became less frequent. David found himself sleeping better too, no longer lying awake all night worrying about every aspect of their survival. Sarah's presence provided a safety net that allowed both father and daughter to relax in ways they hadn't since Maria's death. As Family Day approached, David realized that somewhere in the midst of shared dinners and homework sessions, hospital visits and museum trips, Sarah had become essential to their happiness in ways that went far beyond practical assistance. Emma treated her with the natural affection of a child who had found a maternal figure, while David discovered that his feelings had evolved into something much deeper than gratitude or friendship. The realization both thrilled and terrified him, opening possibilities he had never expected to consider again. Family Day at Emma's school arrived with the crisp clarity of early October, leaves crunching under wheels and feet as parents gathered in the decorated gymnasium. Sarah had arrived early, her wheelchair adorned with colorful ribbons that Emma had insisted on attaching the night before. She wore a soft blue sweater that brought out her eyes, and her hair was styled in gentle waves that framed her face. David noticed several parents glancing their way with curiosity, but Sarah seemed oblivious to the attention, focused entirely on Emma's excited chatter about the day's activities. Emma proudly introduced Sarah to her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, as her almost mommy, a designation that made David's chest tighten with both joy and apprehension. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had known about their family situation, welcomed Sarah warmly and thanked her for being such a positive influence in Emma's life. The teacher's easy acceptance seemed to signal to other parents that Sarah belonged there, reducing the awkward stares and whispered conversations that David had feared. The morning's activities included a craft station where families created handprint artwork together. David watched as Sarah guided Emma's small hands, their fingers intertwining in paint as they pressed their prints onto construction paper. Emma insisted that Sarah's handprint go in the middle, with hers and David's on either side, creating a visual representation of their unconventional family unit. When other children asked about Sarah's wheelchair, Emma answered with matter-of-fact pride, explaining that Sarah's legs didn't work, but that she was the best at giving hugs and making pancakes. During the parent-child games, Sarah's competitive spirit emerged in ways that delighted Emma and surprised David. She had obviously prepared for the physical challenges, bringing special gloves for better grip and positioning herself strategically for each activity. When they played the three-legged race, Sarah held Emma on her lap while David ran alongside them, their laughter echoing across the gymnasium as they stumbled toward the finish line. They didn't win, but Emma's joy at participating as a complete family team was victory enough. The picnic lunch on the school playground revealed more about Sarah's character as she effortlessly navigated conversations with other parents while keeping Emma entertained. She discussed education policy with a teacher, shared parenting tips with a single mother, and helped organize a cleanup effort when a juice box spill threatened to ruin someone's lunch. Her wheelchair became a gathering point for children who were fascinated by its mechanisms, and Sarah patiently explained how it worked while encouraging respectful curiosity. David found himself watching Sarah interact with the other families, noting how naturally she fit into the community despite being a newcomer. Several parents approached him during the afternoon to comment on how wonderful Sarah was with Emma, and how lucky they were to have found each other. Their assumptions about the nature of his relationship with Sarah both pleased and concerned him, as he realized others saw them as a couple, even when he wasn't sure what they were to each other. As the day wound down, Emma fell asleep in Sarah's lap during the closing ceremony, exhausted from the excitement and activity. Sarah stroked Emma's hair absently while listening to the principal's speech about the importance of family support in children's education. David studied Sarah's profile in the afternoon light, filtering through the gymnasium windows, struck by how natural she looked holding his daughter, how right it felt to have her there beside them. The drive home was quiet, with Emma drowsing in the back seat and Sarah navigating the familiar streets, while David reflected on the day's significance. They had functioned as a family unit in public for the first time, and the experience had felt both comfortable and profound. Other parents had treated them as a complete family. Emma had glowed with happiness all day, and David had caught himself imagining future school events with Sarah by their side. That evening, after Emma had gone to bed clutching the handprint artwork they had made together, David and Sarah sat in his small living room, sharing a bottle of wine Sarah had brought. The conversation was deeper than usual, touching on topics they had previously avoided. Sarah spoke about her fears of never having a family of her own, how her accident had ended not just her dancing career, but also a serious relationship with a man who couldn't accept her disability. David shared his guilt about Maria's death, how he sometimes wondered if he had pushed too hard for experimental treatments that might have given them false hope instead of focusing on quality time together. He admitted his fears about failing Emma, about not being enough to replace the mother she had lost. Sarah listened without judgment, occasionally reaching out to touch his hand when his voice broke with emotion. The intimacy of their conversation created a new level of connection between them. Sarah revealed that she had been attracted to David from their first meeting at the hospital, drawn to his devotion to Emma and his quiet strength under pressure. David confessed that he had thought about her constantly since that first encounter, but had been afraid to pursue anything because his life was so unstable, and he couldn't bear the thought of Emma being hurt by another loss. Their first kiss happened naturally, without planning or dramatic build-up. Sarah had been laughing at something David said when he reached out to brush a strand of hair from her face, and suddenly they were looking into each other's eyes with an intensity that made words unnecessary. The kiss was gentle and tentative, both of them aware of the significance of crossing that boundary from friendship into something deeper. The weeks that followed brought a gradual shift in their relationship as they navigated the transition from friends to something more intimate while maintaining stability for Emma. Sarah began staying later after dinner, sometimes falling asleep on David's couch after long conversations that stretched past midnight. Emma seemed to sense the change between the adults and responded with increased affection towards Sarah, climbing into her lap for bedtime stories and asking when Sarah would come live with them permanently. David's financial situation began to improve slowly but steadily, thanks partly to Sarah's subtle assistance and partly to his own increased confidence and energy. Sarah had connected him with better-paying opportunities through her network of contacts, helping him transition from multiple low-wage jobs to a single position with a nonprofit organization that provided housing assistance to families in crisis. The work was meaningful and paid enough to cover their basic expenses without requiring him to work 3 jobs. Sarah's apartment became a second home for Emma, who loved the accessibility features and open floor plan that made wheelchair navigation easy. Sarah had child-proofed the space and added toys and books, creating an environment where Emma felt completely comfortable. Weekend mornings often found them there, making breakfast together while Emma sat on Sarah's lap, helping to flip pancakes or mix batter. The relationship between Sarah and Emma deepened in ways that sometimes surprised David with their intensity. Emma had begun calling Sarah Mom Sarah to distinguish her from Mama Maria, creating a category that honored both women's places in her life. Sarah never tried to replace Maria's memory, but instead helped Emma process her grief while building new traditions and connections. They had special rituals like Wednesday night art sessions and Saturday morning dance parties where Sarah would play music and spin her wheelchair in circles while Emma danced around her. David's attraction to Sarah had grown beyond initial gratitude into genuine love, though he struggled with anxiety about their future together. Her disability required considerations he had never faced before, from restaurant accessibility to travel logistics, but he found these challenges brought them closer, rather than creating distance. Sarah's matter-of-fact approach to problem-solving and her refusal to be limited by accessibility issues impressed him constantly. Their intimate relationship developed slowly and carefully, both of them aware of Emma's presence and needs. Sarah's disability added complexity to physical intimacy, but her openness about her body and her needs created a level of communication and trust that David had never experienced before. She educated him about spinal cord injuries, explained what she could and couldn't feel, and helped him understand how to touch and please her in ways that worked for her body. The first time Emma asked David directly when he was going to marry Sarah, he was caught completely off guard. They were making dinner together when Emma announced that her friend Jessica's parents were getting married again after being divorced, and she wanted to know if David and Sarah would get married so they could be a real family. David's fumbled response about grown-up relationships being complicated clearly didn't satisfy Emma, who pointed out that they already lived like a family and loved each other, so marriage seemed like the obvious next step. That conversation prompted David to have his first serious discussion with Sarah about their long-term future. They were in her apartment, Emma asleep in the guest room Sarah had created for her, when David brought up Emma's question about marriage. Sarah's response was characteristically direct and honest. She wanted to marry him and adopt Emma if he would have her, but she understood if he needed more time to be sure about taking on a partner with a disability. David's response surprised them both with its certainty. He had been thinking about marriage for weeks, but had been afraid to bring it up for fear of pressuring Sarah or moving too fast. His concerns weren't about her disability, but about whether he could be a good enough husband to someone who had already overcome so much adversity and built such a successful, independent life. Sarah's laughter at his admission broke the tension, and she pointed out that they had both already proven their ability to handle difficult circumstances. The proposal, when it came 2 weeks later, was perfectly suited to their unconventional family. David had planned to wait for a romantic dinner or special occasion, but the moment presented itself during one of Emma's art sessions with Sarah. Emma had been working on a drawing of their family when she looked up and announced that the picture would be perfect if David and Sarah were wearing wedding rings. Without planning or preparation, David found himself getting down on one knee beside Sarah's wheelchair, pulling out the engagement ring he had been carrying for days while trying to find the perfect moment. Emma's shriek of delight when Sarah said yes brought Mrs. Patterson from the bakery downstairs to investigate, and soon they were celebrating with fresh pastries and coffee, while Emma called everyone she could think of to share the news. The elderly baker, who had become fond of Sarah during her frequent visits, insisted on making their wedding cake as a gift. while Emma immediately began planning every detail of the ceremony, from her dress to the flowers to the music. The engagement period was a whirlwind of planning and preparation, complicated by their limited budget and Sarah's accessibility needs. They decided on a small ceremony at the community center where Sarah volunteered, a location that was meaningful to her and fully accessible. Emma insisted on being the maid of honor, a role she took seriously as she helped Sarah choose a dress that would look beautiful while seated and assisted with invitations and decorations. Sarah's family, who lived across the country, were initially concerned about her decision to marry a man with a young child, worried that she was taking on too much responsibility too quickly. A video call with David and Emma helped ease their fears, as they could see the genuine love and respect between all three family members. David's smaller circle of friends and Maria's sister, who had maintained contact with Emma, were overwhelmingly supportive, grateful to see David happy again and Emma thriving. The wedding preparations revealed new depths to their relationship, as they navigated decisions about everything from seating arrangements to honeymoon destinations. Sarah's practical nature complemented David's tendency to worry, while Emma's enthusiasm kept them focused on the joy of the occasion rather than the stress of planning. They decided against a traditional honeymoon, instead planning a family trip to the beach where Emma had never been, making their first vacation together as a married family. Financial planning for their marriage required honest conversations about money, debt, and future goals. Sarah's income from her design work was modest but steady, and combined with David's new job, they would be comfortable rather than wealthy. David's remaining medical debt from Maria's illness would become Sarah's responsibility too, a fact she accepted without hesitation while insisting they create a plan to pay it off systematically rather than letting it continue to drain their resources. The question of children came up naturally during their planning discussions. Sarah had always assumed she would never have biological children due to her disability, but recent medical advances had made pregnancy possible for some women with spinal cord injuries. David was open to more children if Sarah wanted them, but also completely satisfied with Emma as their family. Sarah decided to research the possibilities, but felt no pressure to make decisions immediately, content to focus on becoming Emma's stepmother first. Emma's excitement about the wedding was infectious, spreading to everyone around them. She had definite opinions about every aspect of the ceremony, from insisting that Sarah's wheelchair be decorated with flowers to requesting that they include a unity ceremony, where all three of them would light a candle together. Her suggestions were often surprisingly thoughtful, reflecting her deep understanding of what the marriage meant for their family unit. The week before the wedding brought a flurry of final preparations and a few last-minute challenges. Emma came down with a mild cold that had her worried she wouldn't be well enough to perform her duties as maid of honor. Sarah's wedding dress required last-minute alterations to ensure it would look perfect while she was seated. David's anxiety about being a good husband manifested in sleepless nights spent reviewing his vows and worrying about the ceremony details. The bachelor and bachelorette parties were family affairs, with David, Sarah, and Emma spending the evening before the wedding together at Sarah's apartment, sharing pizza and watching romantic comedies while Emma painted everyone's nails. It wasn't traditional, but it felt right for their unconventional family, allowing them to calm their nerves together rather than spending the night apart worrying. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, with autumn leaves creating a perfect backdrop for their outdoor ceremony. Emma woke up in Sarah's guest room, immediately checking to make sure her cold hadn't worsened overnight and that her special dress still fit perfectly. Sarah had arranged for a professional photographer, a gift from her parents, who would capture not just the ceremony, but the natural interactions between their new family. As they prepared for the ceremony, David found himself overwhelmed with gratitude for the journey that had brought them to this moment. 2 years ago, He had been drowning in grief and financial stress, convinced that he would never be happy again and terrified that he wasn't enough for Emma. Now he was about to marry a woman who had brought stability, love, and joy back into their lives, creating a family stronger than anything he had imagined possible. Sarah's morning preparations were a study in calm efficiency, but David could see the excitement in her eyes as Emma helped her with final touches to her hair and makeup. She looked radiant in her ivory dress, chosen specifically to complement her wheelchair rather than hide it. The florist had created a beautiful arrangement for her chair that matched her bouquet, making her mobility device part of the wedding's aesthetic rather than something to work around. Emma's role as maid of honor had been carefully planned to include her completely in the ceremony. She would walk down the aisle first, scattering rose petals from a basket decorated with ribbons. Then she would help Sarah navigate to the altar, a symbolic representation of how she had brought them together and would continue to be part of their married life. Her dress was a smaller version of Sarah's, and she wore a flower crown that made her feel like a princess. The guests began arriving an hour before the ceremony, a small group of family and friends who had supported them through the challenges of the past year. Mrs. Patterson had closed the bakery early to attend, bringing a selection of pastries for the reception. Sarah's volunteer colleagues from the hospital were there, along with Emma's teacher and several of David's co-workers from his new job. The gathering was intimate, but filled with genuine affection for the couple and excitement about their future. Together, as the ceremony time approached, David felt the familiar flutter of nerves that had plagued him all week. But when the music started and he saw Emma walking down the aisle with her basket of petals, followed by Sarah in her decorated wheelchair with her bouquet held high, all his anxiety melted away. This was right. This was their family, imperfect and unconventional, but filled with more love than he had ever thought possible. The wedding cake incident that would happen later seemed impossible to imagine as he watched his bride approach with tears of joy in her eyes and their daughter beaming beside her. The wedding cake lay in ruins on the church floor, frosting scattered like shattered dreams across the polished tiles. Sarah sat frozen in her wheelchair, her face burning with shame as the reception hall fell into uncomfortable silence. The accident had happened during their first dance attempt when her wheel caught the tablecloth, sending the three-tiered masterpiece crashing down in a cascade of buttercream and broken porcelain figurines. Emma's innocent question about whether this meant Sarah wouldn't be her real mommy now hung in the air like an accusation, while guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether to help clean up or pretend nothing had happened. David knelt beside the wreckage, his new tuxedo stained with vanilla frosting, trying to salvage what remained of Mrs. Patterson's generous gift. The elderly baker rushed forward with towels, her face kind but worried as she surveyed the destruction of hours of careful work. Sarah's hands trembled as she gripped her wheelchair's armrests, the joy of their perfect ceremony evaporating in an instant, as familiar feelings of inadequacy and self-doubt crashed over her like a tide. The photographer, who had been capturing their celebration moments before, lowered his camera uncertainly while the small band stopped playing mid-song. Sarah's mother rose from her seat, her face etched with the same worried expression she had worn throughout the engagement, the look that said she had always feared something like this would happen. David's co-workers exchanged glances, and Emma's teacher reached out instinctively to comfort the little girl, whose lower lip was beginning to tremble with confusion and disappointment. Sarah's voice, when she finally found it, was barely above a whisper. She apologized repeatedly, her usual confidence shattered along with the cake, reverting to the self-conscious uncertainty that had plagued her in the early months after her accident. David tried to reassure her, explaining to everyone that accidents happen and the cake wasn't what mattered. But Sarah couldn't hear his words over the roar of her own shame and the echo of a dozen similar moments when her disability had disrupted normal activities. The reception continued with forced cheerfulness as volunteers swept up the debris, and Mrs. Patterson miraculously produced a backup dessert from her catering supplies. But the mood had shifted irrevocably. Sarah smiled and accepted congratulations from well-meaning guests, but David could see the strain in her eyes, the way she had retreated into herself as a protective mechanism. Emma clung to Sarah's side, sensing the adult distress even if she didn't fully understand its source, her earlier excitement replaced by a quiet worry that made David's heart ache. The evening ended earlier than planned, with guests offering gracious farewells and promises to see the family soon. But Sarah's responses were mechanical, her usual warmth replaced by polite distance. During the cleanup, she insisted on helping, despite David's protests, as if punishing herself for the disruption by taking on physical tasks that were more difficult from her wheelchair. Her movements were sharp and efficient, lacking the fluid grace that usually characterized her actions, betraying the emotional turmoil beneath her composed exterior. The drive to their new apartment, the ground-floor unit they had rented together, was uncomfortably quiet. Emma fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted from the day's emotional roller coaster, while Sarah stared out the passenger window without speaking. David tried several times to start a conversation, to reassure her that the cake incident meant nothing to him, but Sarah's responses were monosyllabic. Her body language closed off in a way he hadn't seen since their early acquaintance. Their wedding night was spent in separate rooms, Sarah claiming she needed space to process the day's events, while David lay awake on the couch, still in his stained tuxedo, wondering how their perfect day had ended in such loneliness. He could hear Sarah moving around in their bedroom, the soft sounds of her transferring from wheelchair to bed, and he longed to go to her, to hold her and remind her that she was loved exactly as she was. But something in her demeanor warned him away, told him that his comfort wasn't what she needed in that moment. The next morning brought no improvement in Sarah's mood. She was up early, making breakfast with mechanical precision while avoiding eye contact with David. Emma bounced into the kitchen full of questions about their honeymoon trip to the beach, but Sarah's responses were distracted, her usual enthusiasm for Emma's chatter noticeably absent. David watched his new wife serve eggs and toast with the same careful efficiency she brought to everything, but none of the joy that had characterized their relationship was visible in her movements. Emma's innocent comments about the wedding gradually revealed the depth of her confusion about the previous evening's events. She asked why Sarah had looked so sad after the cake fell, whether grown-ups always cried at weddings, and if the broken cake meant their family was broken too. Each question seemed to drive Sarah deeper into her shell, her responses becoming shorter and more strained until she excused herself to take a shower, leaving David to field Emma's concerns alone. The beach trip, planned as a celebration of their new family unit, became a test of endurance rather than a joyful vacation. Sarah had researched wheelchair-accessible accommodations and activities extensively, but her usual excitement about new experiences was replaced by grim determination to prove she could function normally despite her limitations. She pushed herself to participate in every planned activity, from beach walks to miniature golf, but her smile never reached her eyes, and David could see the exhaustion building behind her forced enthusiasm. Emma sensed the tension between the adults and began acting out in small ways, demanding attention and reassurance that manifested as clinginess toward David and increasingly elaborate attempts to make Sarah laugh. Her efforts were heartbreaking in their desperation, 8-year-old logic telling her that if she could just be good enough, funny enough, helpful enough, she could fix whatever was wrong between her parents. David found himself caught between comforting his daughter and trying to reach his wife, succeeding at neither task completely. The breaking point came on their third day at the beach when Sarah's wheelchair became stuck in the sand during what should have been a romantic sunset walk. David was carrying Emma, who had tired from playing in the waves, when they heard Sarah call for help. They rushed back to find her struggling with the wheels, her face flushed with exertion and frustration, as she tried to free herself from the soft sand that had seemed so innocuous when they started their walk. David immediately moved to help, but Sarah's sharp refusal stung like a slap. She insisted she could handle it herself, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion, as she continued to struggle with the trapped wheels. Emma watched in silence, her eyes wide with the kind of fear children feel when the adults in their lives seem to be falling apart. Other beachgoers began to notice the situation, their curious stares adding to Sarah's humiliation as she fought against both the sand and her own limitations. When David finally ignored her protests and freed the wheelchair despite her objections, Sarah's composure cracked completely. She turned on him with tears streaming down her face, accusing him of marrying her out of pity, of treating her like a charity case who needed to be rescued from every difficulty. Her words were cruel and calculated to hurt, each accusation designed to push him away before he could abandon her, the way she was convinced he inevitably would. Emma began crying, overwhelmed by the adult conflict she couldn't understand but could feel in every harsh word and angry gesture. David tried to comfort both his wife and daughter simultaneously, but Sarah's pain had transformed into something ugly and destructive, years of suppressed fears about her worthiness and lovability, spilling out in a torrent of self-recrimination and blame. She accused David of using her to provide a mother figure for Emma, of never really seeing her as a desirable woman, but only as a convenient caregiver. The fight escalated as they made their way back to the hotel, Sarah's accusations becoming more personal and cutting, while David struggled to defend himself without saying things he would regret. Emma walked between them in silence, her small hand gripping David's tightly while her eyes remained fixed on Sarah, with the desperate hope that this was all a terrible mistake that would somehow resolve itself. The other hotel guests stared. As they passed through the lobby, the elegant couple from the morning transformed into a family in crisis. Their hotel room became a battlefield of whispered arguments and tense silences, with Emma curled up in the corner watching cartoons at maximum volume to drown out the adult conflict. Sarah had positioned her wheelchair by the window, staring out at the ocean with the kind of hollow expression David recognized from her early days in the hospital. Every attempt at conversation ended in renewed hostility, each apology met with fresh accusations that revealed the depth of Sarah's self-doubt and fear. The drive home was a 6-hour exercise in careful politeness, all of them exhausted from the emotional strain of their ruined vacation. Emma fell asleep within the first hour, leaving David and Sarah to navigate the silence that had replaced their usual easy conversation. Sarah spent the journey staring out the window or reading, her body language clearly communicating her desire to avoid any meaningful interaction with her husband of less than a week. Back in their apartment, the routines they had established during their courtship felt forced and artificial. Sarah threw herself into work projects with manic intensity, spending long hours at her computer designing graphics for clients while avoiding family activities she had previously enjoyed. Emma's homework sessions with Sarah became stilted affairs, lacking the playful creativity that had characterized their earlier interactions. David found himself walking on eggshells, afraid that any gesture of help or concern would be interpreted as pity or condescension. The transformation in their household was devastating for Emma, who had been so excited about having a complete family only to watch it disintegrate before her eyes. She began having nightmares again, waking up crying for her mama Maria and asking David if Sarah was going to leave them like Mommy had. Her questions revealed the depth of her understanding about adult relationships and her terror that she was somehow responsible for the growing distance between David and Sarah. Sarah's work became her refuge, a place where her disability was irrelevant and her competence was unquestionable. She took on increasingly complex projects, working late into the night to avoid the uncomfortable intimacy of family dinners and bedtime routines. Her clients praised her innovative designs and professional reliability, providing the validation she couldn't seem to find in her personal relationships. The computer screen became her world, a controllable environment where she could succeed without risk of embarrassment or failure. David's attempts to bridge the growing gap between them were met with polite deflection or outright hostility. Sarah had constructed walls around herself that seemed impenetrable, interpreting every gesture of love as manipulation and every expression of concern as evidence of his regret about their marriage. She began sleeping in the guest room, claiming her work schedule was disrupting David's sleep, but really seeking the safety of isolation where she couldn't disappoint anyone with her limitations. The situation reached a crisis point when Emma's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, called to express concern about the little girl's declining academic performance and increased anxiety at school. Emma had been falling asleep in class, forgetting homework, assignments, and displaying behavioral issues that suggested serious stress at home. The teacher's gentle questions about family changes or difficulties forced David to confront the reality that their marital problems were seriously affecting his daughter's well-being. That evening, David attempted to have a serious conversation with Sarah about Emma's struggles, hoping that their shared love for his daughter might provide a bridge back to each other. But Sarah's response was to blame herself entirely, insisting that Emma had been happy and stable before she entered their lives, and that her presence was clearly harmful to the child's development. Her self-flagellation was painful to witness, each word revealing the depth of her conviction that she was fundamentally flawed and destructive to everything she touched. Sarah's family began calling more frequently, her mother's worried voice asking careful questions about how married life was treating her daughter. Sarah's responses were carefully crafted to reveal nothing of her struggles, maintaining the facade of happiness while privately believing that everyone's worst fears about her hasty marriage were being confirmed. She began making plans to return to her old apartment, convincing herself that David and Emma would be better off without her complications and limitations. The final blow came when Sarah overheard Emma talking to her stuffed elephant, the gift Sarah had given her during their first hospital encounter. Emma was having an elaborate conversation with the toy, asking it why Mom Sarah didn't want to play anymore, and whether it was because Emma hadn't been good enough at the wedding. The innocent words cut through Sarah's defenses like a knife, confirming her worst fears that she was failing the child who had welcomed her so completely into their family. That night, Sarah began packing her belongings while David worked his evening shift, carefully removing traces of her presence from their shared spaces. She told herself it was temporary, just a trial separation to give everyone space to think. But her systematic approach to erasing herself from their lives suggested a more permanent intention. She left notes explaining her actions, trying to frame her departure as a selfless act of love rather than an abandonment born of fear and self-doubt. Emma found the packed suitcases first, her sharp cry of distress alerting David to Sarah's intentions when he returned from work. The sight of his wife's belongings neatly stacked by the door hit him like a physical blow, the reality of losing her making him understand just how much he had come to depend on her presence in their lives. Emma clung to Sarah's wheelchair, begging her not to leave and promising to be a better daughter if only she would stay. Sarah's resolve wavered in the face of Emma's desperate pleas, but her self-destructive certainty that she was harmful to their family pushed her forward with her plans. She tried to explain to Emma that sometimes grown-ups needed space to figure things out, but her words sounded hollow even to her own ears. The little girl's tears and desperate promises to be better revealed how completely she blamed herself for the adult conflict, adding another layer of guilt to Sarah's already overwhelming burden of self-recrimination. David's pleading fell on deaf ears as Sarah transferred her belongings to her van with mechanical efficiency. She had retreated so far into her protective shell that his words of love and reassurance couldn't penetrate the barrier she had constructed around her heart. Every gesture of affection was interpreted as pity, every expression of need as manipulation, and every plea for her to stay as evidence that she was being selfish by considering her own emotional needs. The apartment felt hollow and empty after Sarah's departure, despite the fact that most of the furniture and decorations remained. Emma wandered through the rooms like a lost soul, touching surfaces where Sarah's belongings had been and asking David repeatedly when she was coming back. The silence that had characterized their final weeks together was replaced by an even more oppressive emptiness, the absence of Sarah's presence creating a void that seemed to expand with each passing hour. David found himself unable to concentrate. At work, his thoughts constantly returning to his wife and the marriage that seemed to be dissolving, despite his desperate desire to save it. His colleagues noticed his distraction and declining performance, but he couldn't explain that his heart was breaking for a woman who had convinced herself that leaving was an act of love rather than an act of fear. The future they had planned together seemed as shattered as the wedding cake, destroyed by forces that felt beyond his control or understanding. 2 weeks after Sarah's departure, David found himself standing outside her old apartment building at 3 a.m, rain soaking through his jacket as he stared up at the dark windows. He had driven there without conscious decision, pulled by a desperation that made sleep impossible and rational thought a luxury he couldn't afford. Emma had cried herself to sleep again, asking for the 100th time when Mom Sarah was coming home, and David had run out of gentle lies to tell his daughter about temporary separations and grown-up problems. Sarah's van was parked in her designated accessible space, confirming she was inside the apartment she had maintained even after their marriage. David had discovered the lease continuation when he tried to help with their joint finances, another secret that revealed how little faith Sarah had possessed in their future together. The knowledge that she had kept an escape route ready stung almost as much as her actual departure, suggesting their entire relationship had been conducted under the shadow of her expectation of inevitable failure. The security door to the building remained locked, preventing David from reaching Sarah's apartment, but he could see the faint glow of computer screens through her window. She was awake, probably working on another design project to distract herself from the wreckage of their marriage. David pressed his forehead against the cold glass of the entrance, feeling utterly helpless as he contemplated the physical and emotional barrier separating him from the woman he loved. A movement in Sarah's window caught his attention. She had appeared briefly in the frame, her silhouette unmistakable as she moved from her computer to another part of the room. For a moment, David thought she might have seen him, might come down to talk, but the window remained empty, leaving him to wonder if she was deliberately avoiding him or simply unaware of his presence. The possibility that she knew he was there, but chose not to acknowledge him, felt like another rejection, another confirmation that their marriage was beyond salvage. David's phone buzzed with a text message from Mrs. Rodriguez, sent despite the late hour because she knew he worked irregular shifts. Emma had fallen asleep during reading time again, and the teacher was growing increasingly concerned about the 8-year-old's emotional state. The message included gentle suggestions about counseling resources and family support services, professional language that barely concealed Mrs. Rodriguez's alarm about Emma's deteriorating condition. The drive home took David through empty streets that reflected his own sense of isolation and failure. He had promised Emma a complete family, had believed he could provide the stability and love she needed, but instead he had introduced chaos and heartbreak into her young life. Sarah's departure had confirmed Emma's deepest fear that the adults she loved would abandon her, recreating the trauma of her mother's death in a new and devastating form. Emma was awake when David returned, sitting by her bedroom window with the stuffed elephant Sarah had given her, staring out at the dark street as if willing Sarah's van to appear. Her small face was streaked with tears, and her pajamas were twisted from restless sleep that had provided no real rest. When she saw David, She ran to him with the desperate intensity of a child who had been afraid he too might disappear into the night. The conversation that followed was one of the most difficult of David's life. Emma's questions came in a torrent of 8-year-old logic and emotion, demanding explanations for adult behavior that David couldn't fully understand himself. She wanted to know if she had caused Sarah to leave, if saying the wrong thing at the wedding had broken their family, if there was something she could do to bring Mom Sarah back home. Each question revealed the depth of Emma's self-blame and her desperate need for reassurance that wouldn't ring hollow. David tried to explain that grown-ups sometimes had problems that had nothing to do with children, that Sarah's leaving wasn't Emma's fault and wasn't permanent, but his words felt inadequate against the evidence of Emma's daily experience. Sarah had been the most consistent maternal presence in Emma's life since Maria's death, and her sudden absence had recreated the same sense of abandonment and uncertainty that had characterized Emma's early grief. The days that followed established a new routine of carefully managed survival. David arranged for Mrs. Patterson to watch Emma after school, the elderly baker's kindness providing some stability while David struggled to maintain his work performance. Emma's behavior became increasingly erratic, swinging between manic attempts to be perfect and episodes of inconsolable crying that seemed to emerge from nowhere. Her drawings returned to the dark themes that had characterized her art immediately. After Maria's death, filled with storm clouds and broken hearts, David's attempts to contact Sarah were met with polite but firm boundaries. She answered his calls but kept conversations brief and focused on practical matters like mail forwarding and shared expenses. Her voice carried none of the warmth that had characterized their relationship, replaced by a professional distance that made David feel like he was talking to a stranger. When he tried to discuss their marriage or Emma's distress, Sarah redirected the conversation or ended the call entirely, maintaining her conviction that separation was best for everyone involved. Sarah's isolation in her apartment became a form of self-imposed prison. She had dismissed her cleaning service and grocery delivery, forcing herself to navigate public spaces where her wheelchair drew attention and reminded her of her limitations. Each trip to the store or medical appointment became an exercise in enduring the stares and awkward interactions that she had learned to handle with grace during her recovery, but which now felt like confirmation of her fundamental difference and unworthiness. The design work that had once provided Sarah with satisfaction and purpose became a mechanical process of completing assignments without engagement or creativity. Her clients began to notice a decline in the innovative thinking that had made her successful, though her technical skills remained flawless. The computer screen that had once been a window to artistic expression became a barrier between Sarah and the world, a place to hide from the emotional connections that had proven too painful to maintain. Emma's school performance continued to decline despite Mrs. Rodriguez's careful attention and modified expectations. The 8-year-old's anxiety manifested in physical symptoms that concerned the school nurse, including frequent headaches and stomach problems that had no apparent medical cause. When Emma asked to call Sarah during a particularly difficult day, Mrs. Rodriguez made the call, hoping that hearing from the child might reach Sarah in ways that David's pleas had not. The conversation between Emma and Sarah was brief but devastating for both participants. Emma's innocent questions about when she was coming home and whether she still loved them cut through Sarah's emotional defenses like a blade. Sarah's careful responses about needing time to think and figure things out sounded hollow even to her own ears, and Emma's disappointed acceptance of these explanations revealed how much the child had learned about adult abandonment and broken promises. After the call, Sarah found herself sobbing in her wheelchair for the first time since her departure, the controlled emotions she had maintained finally breaking through her carefully constructed barriers. Emma's voice had reminded her of everything she was losing, not just David's love, but the chance to be a mother to a child who had welcomed her so completely. The stuffed elephant she had given Emma seemed to mock her from its place on her shelf, a reminder of the connection she had severed out of fear and self-doubt. David's breaking point came when he found Emma's newest drawing, a picture of their family with Sarah's figure erased so thoroughly that the paper was worn thin from repeated attempts to remove her presence. Emma had apparently decided that if she couldn't have Sarah back, she would try to forget her entirely, a coping mechanism that broke David's heart with its tragic logic. The drawing revealed the depth of Emma's pain and her attempt to protect herself from further disappointment by rejecting hope entirely. That evening, David made a decision that would change everything. Instead of his usual careful text message or brief phone call, he appeared at Sarah's apartment building with Emma, determined to force a confrontation that might break through the walls Sarah had built around herself. Emma carried a new drawing, this one showing their family complete and happy, with a note written in her careful second-grade handwriting asking Sarah to please come home, because they missed her too much to bear. Sarah's surprise at seeing them through her intercom camera was evident in her voice, which carried none of the controlled distance of their recent conversations. Emma's presence complicated Sarah's ability to maintain her emotional barriers, and she buzzed them into the building before she could reconsider the wisdom of face-to-face contact. The elevator ride to Sarah's floor gave David time to rehearse the words he hoped might reach his wife, but Emma's nervous energy and obvious excitement at seeing Sarah again reminded him that this confrontation would affect his daughter as much as his marriage. Sarah's apartment looked exactly as it had before their marriage, as if the months of their relationship had been erased from her environment. The photographs of their family activities were gone, the child-friendly modifications removed, and the space restored to its original sterile perfection. Emma noticed the changes immediately, her face falling as she realized that Sarah had eliminated all traces of their connection, including the artwork Emma had created specifically for Sarah's walls. The conversation that followed was unlike any they had shared during their relationship. Sarah's carefully maintained composure cracked in the face of Emma's direct questions, and David's refusal to accept her rationalizations about their separation being temporary. Emma asked why Sarah had thrown away her drawings, whether she didn't love them anymore, and if she was going to be like Mama Maria and never come back. Each question stripped away another layer of Sarah's protective detachment, forcing her to confront the reality of what her departure had cost all of them. David's approach was different from his previous attempts at reconciliation. Instead of pleading or trying to convince Sarah of his love, he simply described the daily reality of their lives without her. He talked about Emma's nightmares, her declining school performance, and her desperate attempts to understand why another mother figure had disappeared from her life. He described his own struggles to provide the emotional support Emma needed, while grieving the loss of the partnership that had made him a better father and a happier man. Sarah's defenses began to crumble as she listened to the concrete consequences of her decision to leave. Her intellectual understanding that separation was best for everyone couldn't stand against the evidence of actual harm being caused by her absence. Emma's obvious distress and David's exhausted appearance contradicted every rationalization Sarah had constructed about her departure being an act of selfless love rather than selfish fear. The turning point came when Emma asked Sarah directly if she had left because of the wedding cake accident, if breaking something meant their family was broken too. The 8-year-old's logic was painfully clear in her connection between the fallen cake and Sarah's departure, revealing how a moment of physical clumsiness had been interpreted as a sign of fundamental incompatibility. Sarah's explanation that the cake had nothing to do with her leaving rang false even to her own ears, since she knew the accident had triggered her spiral into self-doubt and self-rejection. Emma's response to Sarah's denial was to produce her drawing, the one showing their family happy and complete, and to ask Sarah to explain what was really wrong if it wasn't the cake. The child's directness forced Sarah to confront the deeper issues she had been avoiding. The fears about her worthiness and capability that had been triggered by the wedding incident, but had roots much deeper than a single moment of clumsiness. Sarah found herself trying to explain complex emotions about disability and self-acceptance to an 8-year-old who simply wanted her mother figure to come home. David watched the exchange between Sarah and Emma with growing hope, seeing cracks in Sarah's determination to maintain their separation. Emma's innocent questions and obvious love were reaching Sarah in ways that his adult arguments had not, cutting through her intellectual defenses to the emotional core of their relationship. When Emma asked Sarah if she could sit in her lap like she used to, Sarah's automatic acceptance revealed how much she had missed their physical closeness and easy affection. The sight of Emma curled against Sarah's chest, both of them crying quietly, broke something fundamental in Sarah's resistance to reconnection. The child's complete trust and acceptance reminded Sarah of what she had given up, not just romantic love, but the chance to be a mother to someone who needed her. Emma's whispered confession that she had been having bad dreams about Sarah leaving forever revealed the depth of trauma that Sarah's departure had caused, making it impossible for her to continue believing that her absence was beneficial. Sarah's admission that she had made a mistake in leaving came slowly, emerging through tears and broken sentences as she struggled to articulate the fear and self-doubt that had driven her away. She tried to explain to Emma and David how the wedding cake incident had made her feel like she would always be a source of disruption and embarrassment, how her disability would continue to create problems that a normal family wouldn't face. Her words revealed the depth of her internalized shame and her conviction that David and Emma would eventually grow tired of accommodating her limitations. David's response was immediate and fierce, rejecting every assumption Sarah had made about his feelings and motivations. He reminded her of all the ways she had enriched their lives, how her presence had made him a better father and given Emma the maternal love she desperately needed. His voice broke as he described the emptiness of their home without her, the way Emma's laughter had disappeared along with Sarah's wheelchair tracks on their carpet. Emma's contribution to the conversation was perhaps the most powerful, delivered with the brutal honesty that only children possess. She told Sarah that she didn't care about wheelchairs or accidents or anything, except having her mom Sarah back, that the wedding cake had been stupid anyway, and she would rather have no cake forever than no Sarah. Her words cut through years of Sarah's accumulated fears and assumptions, reducing the complex issues of disability and acceptance to the simple truth of a child's unconditional love. The reconciliation began tentatively, with Sarah agreeing to return for dinner and to discuss the possibility of rebuilding their relationship. Emma's excitement was immediate and overwhelming, her joy at this small concession revealing how much hope she had been carrying despite her apparent acceptance of their separation. David felt a cautious optimism as he watched Sarah interact with Emma again, seeing glimpses of the woman who had brought such light into their lives before fear had driven her away. The evening they spent together in Sarah's apartment was a careful navigation of renewed intimacy and persistent uncertainty. Emma insisted on helping Sarah make dinner, their easy collaboration in the kitchen revealing how much they had both missed their shared routines. David found himself remembering why he had fallen in love with Sarah as he watched her patience with Emma's chatter, and her obvious delight in the child's attention and affection. The conversation about their future was honest but difficult, with Sarah acknowledging her fears while David and Emma expressed their needs and hopes. Sarah's commitment to returning was tentative, conditioned on their ability to work through the issues that had driven them apart, and her own willingness to confront the self-doubt that had made her such a destructive force in her own happiness. Emma's simple declaration that she would help Sarah remember how much they loved her provided the foundation for the healing work that lay ahead. The therapist's office was designed for accessibility, with wide doorways and furniture arranged to accommodate wheelchairs, but Sarah still felt exposed as she sat beside David on the comfortable couch Dr. Marina Vasquez had been recommended. by Sarah's physician, a specialist in family counseling who had extensive experience working with couples facing disability-related challenges. Emma was in the waiting room, coloring in a book while the adults worked through the complex emotions that had nearly destroyed their marriage. Sarah's return home 3 days earlier had been tentative and conditional, accompanied by a list of requirements that included professional counseling and honest communication about her fears regarding her disability. David had agreed to everything without hesitation, recognizing that Sarah's willingness to try again was a gift that shouldn't be taken for granted. Emma had celebrated by making a welcome home banner that now hung in their bedroom, decorated with glitter and hearts that caught the morning light. Dr. Vasquez had a gentle but direct approach that helped Sarah articulate feelings she had never spoken aloud. The therapist explained how trauma from acquired disability often created secondary, emotional injuries that could emerge years after the initial accident, triggered by life changes or stress that reactivated old fears about worthiness and capability. Sarah found herself describing thoughts and feelings she had kept hidden, even from herself, about the ways her accident had changed not just her mobility, but her entire sense of identity and value. The session revealed how deeply Sarah had internalized society's assumptions about disability, despite her outward confidence and success. She spoke about the constant pressure to prove herself as capable and independent, the exhaustion of always being the inspirational figure who overcame obstacles with grace and determination. The wedding cake incident had stripped away her carefully maintained facade, revealing the vulnerable woman beneath who still questioned whether she deserved love and acceptance exactly as she was. David's role in the counseling was to listen and learn, discovering aspects of Sarah's experience that she had never shared during their courtship and marriage. He began to understand how his well-meaning attempts to help had sometimes reinforced her feelings of inadequacy, how his desire to protect her from difficulties had sent the message that he saw her as fragile rather than strong. The therapist helped him recognize the difference between support and rescue, between love and pity, distinctions that would be crucial for rebuilding their relationship on firmer ground. Emma's integration into their healing process happened gradually, with family sessions that helped all three of them communicate more effectively about their needs and fears. The 8-year-old's perspective often cut through adult complexity with startling clarity, asking questions that forced Sarah and David to examine their assumptions and motivations. When Emma asked why grown-ups made things so complicated when love was supposed to be simple, Dr. Vasquez used the question to explore how adult wounds could interfere with natural affection and acceptance. The breakthrough moment came during their 4th session when Sarah finally spoke about her deepest fear about becoming Emma's mother. She confessed that she was terrified of failing Emma, the way she felt she had failed her own dreams of becoming a professional dancer, of being another disappointment in a child's life that had already been marked by loss and instability. Her voice broke as she described watching Emma's joy at having a mother figure and knowing that she might not be strong enough to sustain that role through future challenges and difficulties. David's response surprised even himself with its intensity. He reminded Sarah of all the ways she had already succeeded as Emma's mother, how she had brought stability and joy into their lives when they desperately needed both. He described specific moments when Sarah's presence had made the difference between despair and hope, times when her unique perspective and gentle strength had provided exactly what Emma needed to feel secure and loved. Emma's contribution to that session was to climb into Sarah's lap and announce that she didn't want a perfect mommy, just her mom Sarah, who made the best pancakes and gave the best hugs and understood what it felt like when sad things happened. The child's simple declaration that love wasn't about being perfect, but about being present, dissolved years of Sarah's accumulated fears about her adequacy as a parent and partner. The healing process extended beyond the therapist's office into their daily lives, with small changes that acknowledged Sarah's needs while strengthening their family bonds. They established new routines that included Sarah's perspective from the beginning, rather than trying to fit her into existing patterns. Emma learned to help with tasks that were easier when approached collaboratively, turning potential obstacles into opportunities for teamwork and connection. Sarah's work life began to improve as her emotional state stabilized, her creativity returning along with her confidence in their relationship. She took on a major project designing accessibility resources for a children's hospital, work that combined her professional skills with her personal experience in ways that felt meaningful and important. The project required collaboration with medical professionals and families, connections that helped Sarah see her disability as a source of insight and strength rather than limitation. David's understanding of Sarah's daily reality deepened through deliberate education and observation. He learned about the physical and emotional energy required for simple tasks, the planning necessary for activities that others took for granted, and the constant problem-solving that characterized life with a mobility disability. His increased awareness made him a better partner, able to anticipate needs without assuming incompetence, and to offer support without implying weakness. Emma's school performance improved dramatically as stability returned to their home life. Mrs. Rodriguez noted the change in Emma's demeanor and academic engagement, the return of the curious and confident child who had briefly disappeared during the family crisis. Emma's artwork evolved too, showing bright colors and hopeful themes that reflected her renewed sense of security and belonging. The anniversary of their wedding arrived 6 months after Sarah's return, marked by a quiet celebration that honored both their survival and their growth. They renewed their vows in a simple ceremony at the community center where Sarah volunteered, with Emma as their only witness and Mrs. Patterson providing a small but perfect cake. This time, when Sarah's wheelchair bumped the table, all three of them laughed, the accident becoming a moment of shared joy rather than shame. Sarah's relationship with her extended family improved as they witnessed the genuine happiness and stability she had found with David and Emma. Her parents, who had initially worried about her hasty marriage to a man with a young child, came to visit and saw for themselves the love and respect that characterized their family dynamic. Her mother's tears as she watched Emma teaching Sarah a new dance routine revealed her recognition that her daughter had found the family she had always deserved. The question of additional children arose naturally as their marriage strengthened and Emma expressed interest in becoming a big sister. Sarah's research into pregnancy options for women with spinal cord injuries revealed possibilities she hadn't previously considered, medical advances that made biological children feasible if she chose to pursue them. The decision process became a family discussion, with Emma offering enthusiastic support for whatever choice Sarah and David made about expanding their family. Emma's 10th birthday celebration became a milestone that marked how far they had all traveled from the crisis that had nearly destroyed their marriage. The party was held at the accessible playground that had become one of their favorite family destinations, with friends from school and Sarah's volunteer work joining the celebration. Emma's wish when she blew out her candles was for their family to stay together forever, a simple request that carried the weight of her lived experience with loss and recovery. Sarah's professional success grew as she became known for her innovative approach to accessible design, work that had grown directly from her personal experience navigating the world with a disability. She was invited to speak at conferences and contribute to policy discussions, using her platform to advocate for better accessibility and understanding. Emma accompanied her to some of these events, proud to introduce her mom Sarah to audiences who were inspired by their story. The decision to adopt a second child came after careful consideration and family discussion. They chose to work with an agency that specialized in placing children with medical needs, feeling that their experience with Emma's early health challenges and Sarah's disability had prepared them to provide a loving home for a child facing similar obstacles. Emma was thrilled to be part of the selection process, helping interview prospective siblings with the seriousness of someone who understood the importance of family bonds. 4-year-old Marcus arrived on a snowy December day, a little boy with cerebral palsy who had been waiting for a family willing to accommodate his mobility needs. Emma took her role as big sister seriously, helping Marcus learn to navigate their home and introducing him to Sarah's wheelchair as a normal part of family life. The sight of Marcus and Sarah racing their wheels down the hospital corridor during his first follow-up appointment became a treasured family memory. Sarah's transformation from the frightened woman who had fled their marriage to the confident mother and professional who embraced her role as family anchor was remarkable to witness. She had learned to see her wheelchair not as a symbol of limitation, but as a tool that enabled her to live fully and love completely. Her rolling mobility became part of their family's unique identity, as natural and essential as Emma's artistic talent or David's steady reliability. The children's friends quickly adapted to Sarah's disability, with their home becoming a gathering place where accessibility was simply part of the environment rather than a special accommodation. Emma and Marcus learned to advocate for inclusion, naturally correcting misconceptions and ensuring their friends understood that wheelchairs were just another way of moving through the world. Their matter-of-fact acceptance of disability became a model for other families in their community. David's growth throughout their journey was equally significant, evolving from a man overwhelmed by single parenthood to a confident husband and father who understood that love wasn't about fixing problems, but about facing challenges together. His relationship with Sarah had taught him that strength came in many forms, that vulnerability could coexist with capability, and that the most powerful love was built on acceptance rather than rescue. The family's influence extended beyond their immediate circle as they became advocates for accessibility and inclusion in their community. Sarah's work with the school district to improve wheelchair access led to broader changes that benefited many families. Emma's presentation about family diversity for her 4th grade class sparked district-wide discussions about representation and acceptance. Marcus's presence in mainstream activities challenged assumptions about what children with disabilities could achieve. Sarah's medical follow-ups became opportunities to support other families facing similar challenges, with her example providing hope for couples wondering if love could survive the complications of acquired disability. Her willingness to share their story honestly, including the crisis that had nearly ended their marriage, helped other families understand that difficulties were normal and recovery was possible with commitment and support. The 5th anniversary of their marriage found them in a place none of them could have imagined during their darkest moments. Emma was thriving in middle school, Marcus was exceeding all expectations for his development, and Sarah had been promoted to head of accessibility consulting for a major design firm. David had completed his degree in social work and was preparing to open a practice specializing in family crisis intervention. Emma's graduation speech as valedictorian of her 8th grade class included heartfelt thanks to her mom Sarah for teaching her that families come in all configurations and that love is measured not by perfection but by persistence. The audience's standing ovation acknowledged not just Emma's academic achievement, but the journey their family had taken to reach that moment of celebration. Marcus's progress in physical therapy had exceeded all medical predictions, his determination, inspired by watching Sarah navigate daily challenges with grace and humor. His goal of racing Sarah in a proper competition had motivated months of training, and their first official race at a local adaptive sports event became a celebration of possibility rather than limitation. The day Sarah discovered she was pregnant with their biological child marked another chapter in their continuing story. The pregnancy, achieved through careful medical planning and monitoring, represented not just the addition of another family member, but the completion of Sarah's healing journey from seeing herself as broken to embracing herself as beautifully whole. Emma and Marcus's excitement about becoming older siblings created a whirlwind of preparation and anticipation. Emma took charge of nursery planning, ensuring everything was accessible for Sarah's wheelchair, while Marcus practiced being gentle with baby dolls and promised to teach his new sibling everything he knew about being brave. Their enthusiasm reminded Sarah and David that families built on love could expand infinitely without diminishing what already existed. The baby's arrival on a warm spring morning brought their story full circle, from the frightened single father and the isolated woman in a wheelchair to a thriving family of 5 whose love had overcome every obstacle placed before them. Sarah held her daughter for the first time while seated in the same wheelchair that had once symbolized limitation, now representing the strength and adaptability that had carried them through their darkest moments to their brightest possibilities. Looking back at the wedding cake disaster that had nearly destroyed their marriage, Sarah and David could finally laugh at how close they had come to losing everything over a moment of clumsiness and misplaced shame. The incident that had seemed like an insurmountable symbol of incompatibility had become a reminder that love wasn't about avoiding difficulties, but about facing them together with courage and commitment. Their story had become one of true transformation, not just for Sarah, who had learned to embrace her complete self, but for David, who had discovered that being a husband meant accepting and celebrating rather than protecting and rescuing, and for Emma and Marcus, who had learned that families were defined by love rather than limitation. Together, they had created something beautiful from broken pieces, proving that the most powerful miracles often came on wheels, rolled forward by determination, and sustained by the endless capacity of hearts that choose love over fear. 10 years had passed since the wedding cake incident that nearly destroyed everything, and Sarah Martinez Chen stood before 300 guests at the National Accessibility Conference, her silver-streaked hair gleaming under the auditorium lights. The keynote speech she was delivering about inclusive family design had grown from her personal journey into a professional mission that had changed thousands of lives. Her wheelchair, now equipped with the latest adaptive technology, moved with the same confident grace that had first attracted David's attention all those years ago in the hospital corridor. Emma, now 22 and graduating from architecture school, sat in the front row beside her father, both of them beaming with pride as Sarah described the community center they had designed together. The project had become Emma's senior thesis, a fully accessible family recreation facility that served as a model for inclusive design nationwide. Marcus, 16 and captain of his school's adaptive racing team, live-streamed the speech from his phone, sharing his mom Sarah's wisdom with his thousands of social media followers, who looked up to him as an example of what determination could achieve. Baby Sophia, who wasn't so much a baby anymore at 8 years old, fidgeted in her seat until David lifted her onto his lap, where she settled with the practiced ease of a child who had grown up secure in her family's love. She had inherited Sarah's expressive brown eyes and David's steady temperament, along with an intuitive understanding of accessibility that made her a natural advocate for inclusion wherever she went. Her school presentations about family diversity had become legendary among teachers, who marveled at her mature perspective on differences and acceptance. The standing ovation that followed Sarah's speech wasn't just for her words, but for the living example she and her family represented. In the audience were dozens of families who had been touched by their story, couples who had found hope in Sarah's honesty about the challenges of disability in marriage, children who had learned that wheelchairs were just another way to move through the world. The Chun family had become inadvertent ambassadors for the truth that love could overcome any obstacle when supported by commitment and understanding. The book tour for Sarah's memoir, Rolling Forward, A Family's Journey Through Love and Limitation, had taken them to 37 cities over 6 months. Each stop brought encounters with families facing similar challenges, parents wondering if their relationships could survive the stress of disability, children learning to navigate a world that wasn't always welcoming to differences. Sarah's willingness to share the darkest moments of their journey including her decision to leave and the slow work of rebuilding trust, had resonated with readers who needed to know that struggles were normal and healing was possible. Emma's architectural firm, founded immediately after graduation with Sarah as her first business partner, specialized in universal design that considered accessibility from the ground up rather than as an afterthought. Their work had gained national recognition for its innovative approach to creating spaces that welcomed everyone, regardless of mobility, age, or ability. The firm's motto, borrowed from Sophia's innocent observation that buildings should be friendly to everybody, reflected the family's core belief that inclusion benefited entire communities. Marcus's athletic achievements had brought their story to sports networks and adaptive athletics organizations worldwide. His racing career had been remarkable not just for his speed and technique, but for his advocacy for young athletes with disabilities. The scholarship fund he had established with his prize money provided equipment and training opportunities for children who might otherwise never discover their potential. His autobiography, written with Emma's help, was being adapted into a film that would introduce their family story to an even wider audience. David's social work practice had evolved into a nonprofit organization that provided family crisis intervention specifically for households dealing with disability-related challenges. His personal experience of nearly losing his marriage had given him unique insight into the emotional complexities that medical professionals often overlooked. The center offered counseling, support groups, and practical resources that addressed both the practical and emotional aspects of living with disability. The family's influence had extended far beyond their individual achievements to create ripple effects throughout their community and beyond. The accessible playground where they had celebrated Sophia's birthday had been expanded 3 times to accommodate the growing number of families who sought out inclusive recreational opportunities. Local schools had implemented curriculum changes that included disability awareness and family diversity as core components, rather than special topics addressed during awareness weeks. Sarah's relationship with her extended family had deepened over the years as relatives witnessed the genuine happiness and stability she had found with David and the children. Her parents, now in their 70s, had become devoted grandparents who delighted in their grandchildren's accomplishments and had learned to see Sarah's disability as just one aspect of her complete and successful life. Family gatherings had evolved to include accessibility considerations naturally, with everyone working together to ensure full participation rather than making special accommodations. The children's perspectives on disability had shaped their friends and classmates in profound ways. Emma's college roommates had initially been nervous about her family's situation, but quickly learned that Sarah's wheelchair was simply part of the household dynamic rather than a source of limitation or awkwardness. Marcus's teammates treated his cerebral palsy as a training advantage rather than a disadvantage, recognizing how his different movement patterns had developed unique racing strategies. Sophia's classmates competed to push Sarah's wheelchair when she visited school, viewing the opportunity as a privilege rather than a chore. Professional recognition for Sarah's work had culminated in her appointment to the President's Committee on Accessibility, a role that allowed her to influence policy at the national level. Her advocacy focused on changing cultural attitudes, rather than just legal requirements, pushing for a society that valued inclusion as a benefit to everyone, rather than a burden imposed for the sake of a minority. Her testimony before Congress about the economic and social benefits of universal design had helped pass landmark legislation requiring accessibility considerations in all federal construction projects. The wedding vow renewal ceremony they held on their 10th anniversary had been a celebration not just of their marriage's survival, but of its transformation into something stronger and more beautiful than either had imagined possible. Emma officiated the ceremony, having been ordained online specifically for the occasion, while Marcus and Sophia served as witnesses to promises that acknowledged both the challenges they had overcome and the adventures that lay ahead. Mrs. Patterson, now retired but still baking special occasion cakes, had created a masterpiece that Sophia jokingly proclaimed divorce-proof because it was too beautiful to knock over. The foundation they established together combined all their individual passions into a comprehensive approach to supporting families affected by disability. Sarah's design expertise, David's counseling experience, Emma's architectural innovation, Marcus's athletic inspiration, and Sophia's natural advocacy skills created a unique organization that addressed multiple aspects of the accessibility challenge. Their annual fundraising gala had become a premier event that brought together celebrities, politicians, and ordinary families whose lives had been changed by the foundation's work. Emma's engagement to her college sweetheart, a fellow architect, who specialized in sustainable design, had brought new energy and perspective to their family dynamic. James had been initially intimidated by the Chun family's public profile and close-knit relationships, but Sarah's warm acceptance and the children's enthusiastic embrace had quickly made him feel like a natural addition to their unconventional household. His proposal, made during a family vacation to a fully accessible resort that Emma had helped design, had been celebrated by all 5 family members who had been secretly conspiring to ensure the couple had the perfect romantic setting. Marcus's acceptance to Stanford University on a full academic scholarship had been overshadowed only by his simultaneous invitation to train with the Paralympic development team. His decision to defer athletics for 2 years to focus on his engineering studies reflected the family's emphasis on education and long-term planning, but everyone knew that his racing dreams were simply postponed rather than abandoned. His younger sister Sophia had announced her intention to become his manager when he returned to competition, a declaration that surprised no one who had watched her negotiate playground disputes with diplomatic skill. Sophia's own emerging talents as an artist and storyteller had been nurtured by the same family environment that had supported her siblings' diverse interests. Her children's book about a family of superheroes who happened to include a mom in a wheelchair had been published by a major house and was being translated into 12 languages. The book's message that differences were superpowers rather than limitations had resonated with children worldwide, sparking classroom discussions about inclusion and acceptance that went far beyond disability awareness. The community center that Emma and Sarah had designed together had become a model for similar projects nationwide, with delegations from other cities visiting to study their innovative approach to universal accessibility. The building's features went beyond ramps and wide doorways to include sensory considerations for children with autism, visual cues for people with hearing impairments, and flexible spaces that could accommodate different types of gatherings and activities. The center's success had led to consulting opportunities that kept both Emma and Sarah traveling frequently, spreading their message of inclusive design to new audiences. Sarah's health had remained stable throughout the years, with regular medical monitoring ensuring that any changes in her condition were addressed promptly. Her decision to have Sophia had required careful medical management, but the pregnancy and delivery had proceeded without complications, proving that with proper support and planning, women with spinal cord injuries could successfully have biological children. Her experience had been documented in medical journals and had provided hope for other women facing similar decisions about family planning. The documentary about their family's journey, produced by a filmmaker who had been inspired by Marcus's story, had won several awards and had been broadcast internationally. The film's honest portrayal of both their struggles and triumphs had sparked conversations about disability, representation in media, and had led to increased funding for accessibility initiatives. Sarah's initial reluctance to participate had been overcome by her recognition that their story could provide hope and practical guidance for other families facing similar challenges. David's doctoral dissertation on family resilience in the face of disability had been published as a textbook that was now used in social work programs across the country. His research had documented the factors that contributed to family success when dealing with acquired disability, confirming through academic study what their family had learned through lived experience. The book's case studies, drawn from his practice and their personal network, provided concrete examples of how families could not only survive, but thrive when supported by appropriate resources and attitudes. The scholarship program they had, established at Emma's alma mater, provided full funding for students with disabilities pursuing degrees in architecture, engineering, or design. The program's recipients were required to spend their summers working with the family's foundation, ensuring that each new cohort of professionals entered their careers with a deep understanding of accessibility principles and inclusive design. Several graduates had gone on to establish their own firms focused on universal design, creating a network of professionals committed to changing the built environment. Sophia's announcement that she wanted to follow in her parents' footsteps by studying both psychology and accessibility design had surprised no one who had watched her natural ability to understand and address people's needs. Her plan to specialize in designing therapeutic environments for children with disabilities reflected the family's commitment to using their experiences to help others. At 8 years old, she was already sketching playground equipment that would be fun for children with different types of mobility, showing an intuitive understanding of inclusive design principles. The family's influence on accessibility standards had extended internationally through Sarah's work with the United Nations on global accessibility guidelines. Her expertise had been sought for major infrastructure projects in developing countries, where accessibility considerations were often overlooked due to resource constraints. Her approach of demonstrating how universal design could be cost-effective and beneficial for entire populations, rather than just people with disabilities, had changed minds and policies worldwide. Looking back at the terrified woman who had once believed that her wheelchair made her unworthy of love and family, Sarah could hardly recognize herself in that frightened person. The journey from shame to pride, from isolation to influence, had been marked by countless small victories and occasional setbacks, but the overall trajectory had been one of continual growth and expanding impact. Her wheelchair, once seen as a symbol of limitation, had become a platform for advocacy and a tool for creating positive change in the world. The legacy they were building together extended far beyond their individual accomplishments to encompass a fundamental shift in how society viewed disability and family. Through their example, their work, and their unwavering commitment to inclusion, the Chun family had demonstrated that love could indeed overcome any obstacle, that families came in all configurations, and that differences were sources of strength rather than shame. Their rolling miracle had become an inspiration for countless others, proving that the most powerful transformations often began with the simple decision to choose love over fear. 25 years had passed since that rainy Tuesday afternoon, when a small voice in a bookstore had changed everything. Sarah Chun sat in her electric wheelchair on the grand stage of the Kennedy Center, her white hair elegantly styled as she prepared to receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom for her lifetime commitment to accessibility and inclusion. The auditorium was filled with dignitaries, advocates, and families whose lives had been transformed by her work, but her eyes searched the crowd for the faces that mattered most. Emma, now 37 and internationally recognized as a pioneer in inclusive architecture, sat beside her husband James and their twin daughters in the front row. Her firm had designed accessible buildings on 6 continents, but she still considered her greatest achievement to be the way she had learned to balance professional success with family devotion. The twins, aged 5, had grown up visiting construction sites and understanding that buildings should welcome everyone, carrying forward the family tradition of seeing accessibility as an essential element of good design rather than an added burden. Marcus, 31 and recently retired from professional racing after winning 3 Paralympic gold medals, had transitioned seamlessly into sports administration, overseeing youth development programs that identified and nurtured young athletes with disabilities. His wife Jennifer, a physical therapist he had met during training, shared his passion for helping children discover their potential regardless of their physical challenges. Their son David, named for his grandfather, was already showing signs of inheriting the family's competitive spirit and natural leadership abilities. Sophia, 23, and completing her doctorate in environmental psychology with a focus on therapeutic design, had spent the morning giving interviews about her groundbreaking research on how physical environments could promote healing and inclusion. Her work built directly on the foundation her family had established, but her fresh perspective and innovative methodologies were opening new frontiers in the field. Her engagement to a fellow researcher who specialized in assistive technology promised to continue the family tradition of partnerships that strengthen both personal and professional endeavors. David, now 69 and officially retired, but still consulting on complex family crisis cases, watched his wife receive the nation's highest civilian honor with tears streaming down his weathered face. The frightened single father who had once worked 3 jobs just to keep his daughter fed had evolved into a respected authority on family resilience, but he had never lost sight of the fact that his greatest accomplishment was simply loving Sarah well enough for her to heal and thrive. The President's citation praised Sarah's transformative vision that turned personal challenge into universal benefit, proving that true leadership means using one's struggles to light the path for others. The words captured the essence of a journey that had begun with shame and fear but had culminated in worldwide recognition for contributions to human dignity and inclusion. Sarah's acceptance speech, delivered without notes, wove together the threads of their family story with larger themes of social justice and the power of love to overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. The private reception following the ceremony brought together representatives from the dozens of organizations Sarah had influenced over the decades. Former students who had become leaders in their own right mingled with government officials and advocacy group founders, all connected by Sarah's example of turning personal experience into professional mission. The conversations buzzed with stories of lives changed, barriers removed, and minds opened through the work that had grown from one family's determination to create meaning from struggle. Emma's daughters, Lily and Rose, navigated the formal gathering with the confidence of children who had grown up understanding that their grandmother's wheelchair was simply part of who she was, no more remarkable than their grandfather's height or their father's accent. They had never known a world where accessibility was an afterthought, having been raised in homes and communities designed from the beginning to welcome everyone. Their matter-of-fact acceptance of diversity in all its forms represented the future Sarah had spent decades working to create. The Foundation's annual report, distributed at the reception, documented the scope of impact that had grown from their family's initial crisis. Thousands of families had received support through difficult transitions. Hundreds of buildings had been designed with universal access principles, and dozens of young professionals had been trained to carry forward the mission of inclusive design. The numbers told only part of the story, unable to capture the individual moments of hope restored and potential realized that had accumulated over the years. Marcus's documentary crew, following him for a project about Paralympic legacy athletes, captured candid moments of the family reunion that occurred naturally during the reception. The film would eventually become part of a series about families who had changed the world, but in those unguarded moments, they were simply grandparents, and parents and children sharing joy in each other's accomplishments. The genuine affection and easy communication between generations spoke to the strong foundation of love that had sustained them through every challenge. Sophia's presentation about her latest research findings drew an audience of researchers and policymakers who were eager to understand how her family's experience had informed her scientific work. Her studies on the psychological impact of inclusive environments had provided empirical support for principles her family had lived by for decades. proving through rigorous methodology what they had known intuitively about the relationship between physical design and human well-being. The evening's entertainment included a performance by the children's choir from the community center Emma and Sarah had designed together, their voices filling the Kennedy Center with songs about acceptance and belonging. Many of the young performers used mobility devices or assistive technology, but their talent and joy transcended any discussion of limitation or difference. The audience's response was enthusiastic, not because of inspiration born from pity, but because of genuine appreciation for artistic excellence. David's brief remarks during the dinner portion of the evening focused on the transformation he had witnessed not just in his own family, but in society's understanding of disability and inclusion. He spoke about the evolution from viewing accessibility as charity to recognizing it as a fundamental aspect of human rights, a change that had occurred largely through the patient work of advocates like his wife, who had refused to accept limitations imposed by others' narrow vision. The private family gathering that followed the public ceremonies took place in the accessible suite the Kennedy Center had provided, with room for everyone to sit comfortably while sharing memories and making plans for the future. The conversation ranged from practical matters, like travel schedules and grandchildren's school events, to deeper discussions about the continuing work of creating a more inclusive world. Even in this moment of celebration, the family's focus remained on the work yet to be done rather than simply savoring past accomplishments. Sarah's reflection on the day's events revealed how completely her perspective had shifted over the decades, from seeing her disability as a personal tragedy to understanding it as the foundation for a meaningful life of service. The woman who had once believed herself unworthy of love and family had become a symbol of possibility for millions of people worldwide, but she remained grounded in the daily reality of being a wife, mother, and grandmother who happened to use a wheelchair. The next generation's plans for continuing the family legacy were already taking shape, with each of the grandchildren showing interest in different aspects of the accessibility movement. Lily had announced her intention to become a doctor who specialized in treating children with disabilities, while Rose was drawn to law and advocacy work. Marcus's son David was still young, but already showed his father's competitive spirit and his grandmother's compassion for others facing challenges. The memorial garden they had established in honor of Maria, David's first wife, had become a place of pilgrimage for families dealing with loss and transition. The space was designed to be fully accessible while providing quiet reflection areas and interactive elements that help children process grief and change. Emma's architectural skills had been combined with Sophia's understanding of therapeutic environments to create a space that honored the past, while nurturing hope for the future. The scholarship recipients who had gathered for the ceremony represented the ongoing impact of the family's commitment to education and opportunity. Young professionals from around the world had been supported through their studies and were now implementing inclusive design principles in their own communities, creating a multiplying effect that extended the family's influence far beyond what they could have achieved individually. The book series that had grown from Sarah's original memoir now included volumes by each family member, offering different perspectives on the experience of living with and loving someone with a disability. The collection had become required reading in social work programs and was frequently cited in academic research on family resilience and adaptation. More importantly, it provided practical guidance and emotional support for families facing similar challenges. The International Conference Center that bore Sarah's name had become a hub for accessibility research and policy development, hosting gatherings that brought together scientists, advocates, and policymakers from around the world. The building itself served as a demonstration of universal design principles, with every element carefully planned to ensure full participation, regardless of physical ability, sensory differences, or cognitive variations. As the evening wound Down and family members began making plans for departure. Sarah found herself thinking about the young woman in the hospital who had first encountered David and Emma so many years ago. That frightened volunteer, convinced that her wheelchair made her a burden rather than a blessing, could never have imagined a life that lay ahead. The journey from isolation to influence had required courage. She hadn't known she possessed in support she had been afraid to accept. The final photograph of the evening showed 4 generations of the Chen family arranged around Sarah's wheelchair, which had been decorated with flowers by the grandchildren in honor of the day's celebration. The image would appear in newspapers and magazines around the world, but for the family, it simply captured a moment of joy and togetherness that had been built through years of choosing love over fear, hope over despair, and action over resignation. The drive back to their hotel took the family past the monuments and memorials that marked important moments in the nation's history of expanding rights and opportunities for all citizens. Sarah's addition to that legacy felt both monumental and natural, the culmination of a life spent believing that every person deserved to be valued and included, regardless of their differences or challenges. The thank you notes that would pour in over the following weeks came from every corner of the globe, from world leaders and fellow advocates, but also from ordinary families whose lives had been touched by the Chen family's example. Parents wrote about children who had learned to see wheelchairs as normal rather than frightening. Architects described buildings that welcomed everyone because of principles Sarah had pioneered, and young people shared stories of finding courage to pursue dreams despite facing physical challenges. The true measure of their success, however, wasn't found in awards or recognition, but in the simple fact that Emma's daughters would grow up in a world where accessibility was expected rather than exceptional, where families like theirs were celebrated rather than pitied, and where love was understood to be stronger than any obstacle life might present. The rolling miracle that had begun with a broken wedding cake had transformed not just one family, but had contributed to changing the world's understanding of what was possible when people chose inclusion over exclusion, hope over fear, and love over limitation. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.